Hi, and welcome to the Folger Shakespeare Library's Masterclass on Teaching Julius Caesar. We are here live from the Folger Library in our little pocket public television studio that belongs to our partners, Alabama Public Television. And we're going to spend the next hour talking with and listening to scholars and classroom teachers and also taking your questions. And it's all going to be focused on Teaching Julius Caesar. As usual, all the professional development at the Folger, we try to work it so that there is something for you as a teacher for your own brain to enrich your knowledge of these plays, new thinking about old plays. And also we want to give you some material and some ideas that you can take to class tomorrow, or you can take to class next week or the week after next. So practical, intellectual, all that stuff together, that's what we always go for. If we already have questions from a number of you, if you want to submit questions during the masterclass, hit the button on the lower right of your screen and give us a question or give us a comment, and we'd be happy to have it. If you are in this masterclass now, we know that you have registered and therefore you've received a packet of materials on Teaching Caesar, very specific classroom activities that were put together actually from the Folger Trove and with the good brains of Greta Brescala and Debbie Gaskin, who are full-time high school teachers and are members of our National Teacher Corps. So we know that you have those in hand, and we're glad for that. Tonight we are going to have as guests 2 scholars and 2 high school teachers. And we're going to go at this play big time. At a couple of points during this hour, we're going to go to some video. Some of that will be, one will be some thoughts from an additional scholar, and others will be stills and also audio from the most recent Folger production of Julius Caesar, which was in 2014. And while you are watching that, in those couple of minutes, we're going to move some bodies around here so we can all fit in this little studio. Before we start, just 2 important things to say by way of grounding. One is that if you have hung around with us at all, either in these classes or any place else, you know that we believe really strongly, and we have seen this play out with every kind of kid in every kind of school, and that is to start with the language. The best way to get kids into the play and into the ideas of the play and the characters of the play is to start them off with the language of the play. Word, line, scene. Go for it. So just to say that, and often what we'll talk about in this next hour will probably reflect that, because it often does. The other thing is that in particular the high school teachers that we're going to be talking with have taught all kinds of kids. So we know that all Shakespeare, but we also know that Julius Caesar works with a number of different kinds of kids. We don't think about it as something for the very lofty. So I just want to say that. We don't think Shakespeare is for the very lofty. The other grounding thing I need to say is that I have for a long time badmouthed this play and said, I don't know why people have to teach Julius Caesar, or I don't know why if kids only get to study 2 plays in high school, one of them has to be the play about when the guy dies in Act 3, and also when the women, die and go mad, and they're hardly in it to begin with. And also many of you have already written to me and said, are you going to talk about the fact that you have said many times when somebody said to you, can you give me some advice about teaching Julius Caesar? I said, you should teach Twelfth Night. That would be my advice, is to teach Twelfth Night instead. So confessional, bad, right? But we're very open-minded here at the Folger. So we're going to spend this hour talking about Caesar. We're going to have a full-on Julius Caesar party. And the first 2 guests at this party are very esteemed scholars. To my right, Ellen Mackay is a professor at Indiana University. The full bios of everybody is in your packet, so this is going to be very brief. Ellen's history, part of her history at the Folger is she was the head scholar in Teaching Shakespeare 2014, will also be in 2016. Christy Desmet, to her right, is also a resident scholar at the Teaching Shakespeare Institute. She teaches at the University of Georgia. They were with us in the summer of 2014 for a month. The 25 teachers who were with us in that institute would follow them anywhere. They're brilliant, and we thought, what could be better, to have scholars looking at the play Julius Caesar than to have 2 women. Reference my earlier comment. So we know that there are lots of different ways of looking at this play, and different scholars have different ways of looking at it. Each of you, I think, probably has a lot of different ways. You should know, I'm not sure if you can see this on camera, but each of them has their copy of Julius Caesar, kind of dog-eared. Ellen's has a lot of tabs in it. these women are really serious. So I want to start with Christy because we had a little bit of a conversation with this before about blood in Julius Caesar, the word blood and the presence of blood. And we're going to start and just go. Go.
All right. Well, when I first started teaching and used this little book, we did nothing but read the play.
Yeah.
Right? And so
We're past that.
very aware of a lot of abstract words and some very good rhetoric. But when I started using sort of more of the Folger techniques of doing some acting and actually tableaus, sometimes enacted with Ninja Turtles, I realized it's a visual play. So that really made things more interesting. And one of the words that can be very abstract but becomes extremely visual, visceral, and present in play is blood. So we start out with Caesar talking about Rome's noble blood in a very abstract, but pretty soon we've got blood raining down on the Capitol and spouting out of things. And there are three really moments when it's blood becomes a real kind of character in the play. One is when Portia wounds her thigh. One is when the conspirators put their arms in blood, in a stunning lack of common sense as far as I can tell. And the third one is when Caesar's body is actually on the stage.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I want to say too about that, the way in which that visceral nature of the blood came across in this period is not fully known to us as researchers, so we don't know fully what the stage conventions are for all of the scenes of bloodshedding in the play, and that mysteriousness is itself kind of tantalizing. But one thing we do know is that from stage directions from other plays from the period, playwrights would ask for the innards of a sheep to represent, for instance, somebody's evisceration, and the massacre, the blood that is the result of the butchery of Caesar may have indeed come from the butcher's shop. So there would have been the smell of offal. In other words, the sort of sensory dimensions of that immersion in blood and viscera and guts is not something that the stage would have shied away from in this period. And I think it's an open question then the degree to which, say, the blood of Caesar, which flows at the moment of his execution, but probably flows again during the oration, when he's exhibited, his wounds are exhibited for the people to see. How much that scene of blood dripping and kind of oozing has in common with the scene of Portia's wounding, right?
You want to talk about that?
I was going to,
Wait, before you do, can I ask a question? I want to go back to, so the word, I know from looking at the word frequency list, right, that the word blood is used.
Would you say 35?
Yeah, 35 or 30, I think 36
30,
times.
yeah.
You guys know because you have the word frequency list in your packet. But just say about that a little bit, about the word and the use of that word.
Well, Julius Caesar's a lot about words that start to lose their meaning. Brutus is an honorable man.
So say about that.
Brutus is an honorable man. They're all honorable men. We all learned that in high school, so that it ceased to be bled out of all its meaning. But blood becomes more and more concrete as the play goes on. You could talk about the nobleness of the blood. You could talk about how every Roman would sacrifice his blood. And it's not until you actually see it and I guess smell it on the stage that blood becomes something that can't be handled in language. It's something real, it's tangible, and it's messy, and it's ugly, and it oozes. So, in a way, the very act of killing Caesar is something that's just gotten away from everyone. It can't be contained, it can't be, what was it Brutus says, let's carve Caesar, famous line, let's carve Caesar as a dish fit for the gods.
Yeah.
No.
Right.
Not when you've stabbed him that many times. You can't have a dish fit for the gods. You've got a bloody corpse.
So wait, can I go back to something that you said though, and ask both of you about this? You said it better than I'm saying it. How in Caesar in the play there's a lot of big language. There's language that becomes empty. What did you say? Or loses
it's like honorable. By the time you get
say
to
more
the
about
end.
that process.
Well, it's just by simple iteration, right? Well, but Brutus is an honorable man, so they're all honorable men. And by the time you get to the end of that speech, I've known this since high school, right? It's like honorable's really been kind of turned on its head. It's ironic.
Right.
And the physical act of the assassination, right, which is supposed to be a gesture of political heroism, loses its ability to be rhetorically spun in that way because the body becomes too present, right? It's as though the highfalutin language starts sort of falling to earth as the bodies start proliferating in this play.
That's fair, because I think often when we teach this in high school, we think this is this big language, big rhetoric.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
completely
It is.
fabulous. No, well, it is, and it's fabulous, and it's got a lot of power. And you're just talking about turning that on its head a little bit and seeing where it loses its power as we go along.
And I think Shakespeare doesn't want you to understand this as a play in which you have to come in with an adoration for the rhetorical tradition and the glorious history of Rome. He gives us lots of opportunities to side with the people. I think if you let the people simply stand for a mob and you understand them as being lesser than the sort of highfalutin figures in this play, you've missed it, right? I think you've missed the ingenuity of Shakespeare in making this historical act something that isn't sort of precious and just for books, right? It's visceral, it's hard, it's messy. People make mistakes. There are terrible errors, misunderstandings, miscalculations.
Yes.
So you have to rub. You need to see the friction between the sort of gorgeous moments of rhetoric and these really base and painfully human moments of error and self-delusion.
Self-delusion. Okay, let me ask you guys about the women.
Sure.
Or the absence of women, or the just let's talk a little bit about that.
Sure. So clearly there are two women in this play, no more, and that seems like few. And they speak very little, right? I mean, both Calpurnia and Portia are relegated to highly marginal roles. However, I think Portia is extraordinarily memorable for the two acts of sort of bodily self-wounding that she commits, right? First by this wound in the thigh that she reveals at the end of her one fairly sustained monologue, and then in a scene that we don't see, her act of suicide. Portia historically was read as an ideal wife, as the perfect virtuous companion to a figure like Brutus. And I think the history of scholarship on Portia really changed in the late part, I'd say, of the 20th century, when largely women started to question how easy it is to sustain that reading when we have this person who seems to hike up her robe and show us here, she says here, right, this wound in her thigh as though she's indicating it, to show us a wound in her thigh that's bleeding. That seems to me to point to this incredibly roiling state of consciousness, this state of distress that she keeps under the surface, right? But she only keeps it under the surface until we see this sort of horrible wound that has become its symptom.
Mm-hmm. So what do you think, Christine?
I think Shakespeare has come in late life to think that Shakespeare is actually pushing back against the Roman, tradition and rhetorical tradition, and he's basically thinking these people are seriously strange.
So wait, can I just say that we don't know what Shakespeare was thinking?
No.
Right?
Of course
just
not.
saying,
But
okay.
that's a hypothetical.
Okay,
so like I said.
but go ahead.
But there's so much in this play that is, it's like, just the lions walking in the street and giving birth in the street, and nobody's paying any attention except Calpurnia.
Except Calpurnia.
She's like the only person who has the sense she was born with, in many ways, in this play.
That's
because,
right.
She's the only one who kept thinking, all these omens. I mean, if this was Macbeth, people would know something was wrong, and they're all just kind of like going on about their business. So that's a. But I wanted to get back to the body. May I?
Yeah, please do.
I'm going to make an advertisement for my favorite part of this play, which is not the oratorical duel between Antony and Brutus, but the scene that comes right before it, and it's like a conversation, you might say, between Antony and the dead body of Caesar.
Will you tell us the act and scene?
It is Act 3, Scene 1.
Go.
And it's a long portion from line 255 on. And Antony addresses the corpse, which is an unusual convention, and says, "Oh, pardon me, thou bleeding piece of earth." And he's really calling attention to the fact that he's a shapeless, dead thing. that I am meek and gentle with these butchers. Thou art the ruins of the noblest man who ever lived in the tide of tides. Woe to the hand that shed this costly blood. And then he points to something Ellen's already referred to. The wounds are, he says, over thy wounds now I prophesy, which like dumb mouths do ope their ruby lips to beg the voice and utterance of my tongue. And so you see this thing on the stage, and then you imagine him bleeding afresh, which is, I guess, a tradition of ghosts, bodies bleeding in the presence of their murderers, like from the beginning of Richard III, right? So
Why is that one of your favorites?
because it's the first time, maybe one of the only times that we see people talking without an audience. The only audience is the body. And it comes across, I know nobody can be seen as totally noble or totally, it comes across as one of those moments that a revelation of internal feeling and love for Caesar. And I think at that moment, it's Antony's play. He loses it, and he has to wait for.
He goes downhill.
But who doesn't, right? He goes
Yeah.
downhill, and he has to wait for middle age to get his own play in Antony and Cleopatra. But at this moment, he manages to stand outside the politics and to seem like a true lover and friend.
Because so much of this play is public.
That's right.
Right.
I think that's a really important point, right? That this is a moment that really humanizes Mark Antony, and it's the moment I think when empathy shifts in the audience from Brutus, who's at this point, on the way to being up to his elbows in blood, right?
Right.
Away from Brutus and onto the person who understands that a dead body is not a symbol, that you can't reduce a human being to the rhetorical force, right, of the collective bathing in his blood as a gesture of sacrifice. That somehow the gesture falls apart in light of the sort of humanity that's lost. And I just wanted to add to this, I have a moment too that I think is evocative in light of that quotation, which is the moment much later when Antony is speaking to the general, to the commons, right, and he's addressing them across the corpse of Caesar, and he talks about how he's about to read the will and everything that Caesar has handed over to the people from the will, and he says any person at this point would go and dip his napkin in his sacred blood, right? Yea, beg a hair of him for memory, and dying mention it within his will. So what I find evocative about this too is that this points almost exactly to the behavior that the public undertook at the execution of Charles II, which happens almost 50. Charles I, sorry, almost 50 years after the writing of this play. In other words, there's a way in which the political process of revolution and of tyrannicide is not only looking to the past, but it's predictive of the future. And the gestures that take place, the activities that take place around these bleeding bodies are not frozen in history, but about to become real again. I guess not about, right? 50 years is still a long time hence. But to me, there's something fascinatingly predictive about this play in that it's full of questions about systems of government. And it turns out that those questions will come home with unbelievable force, right? Within the next half century.
So let me just, this is fabulous. Let me just ask, we just have a couple minutes left at this moment. A short answer, just like a sentence each maybe on the topic of friendship in this play. Really, literally one sentence. How hard is that?
That's hard.
Hard.
If you do your word search on friend and lover, which are kind of go together, you'll see that it's one of the least well defined words in the play.
Wow.
And I think kind of common wisdom is that friendship can either be alliance or it can be deep, visceral, emotional attachment. And people do not examine well enough in this play which one they mean or which one they assume the other one means.
Interesting. Ellen, what do you say about that?
Well, I think...
or you want to let it be?
I think Christy's right. I mean, I think the question for us at the end of the play is whether Brutus's sacrifice of his friend was warranted by the political moment. And I think that there's no stable answer to this question is clear in the fact that someone like Dante would place Brutus at the end of the ninth circle of hell, right, along with Judas Iscariot as the great betrayer, and someone like Swift would idolize Brutus as the figure of personal sacrifice for the good of the state.
Got it. So on that note, we're going to shift our focus to classroom practice, and on our way there, we're going to introduce you to, on video, we're going to introduce you to Gail Kern-Pastor, who is the former director of the Folger Library and the editor of Shakespeare Quarterly, and Georgiana Ziegler, who is our associate librarian, and we have a wonderful bit of them on video talking about Julius Caesar, and also showing you a bit of the Plutarch's Lives volume that was printed in 1579, and also the earliest printed version of Caesar, which was in the first folio, printed in 1623. So this will connect you not only with this play, but with what is in the vaults at the Folger, and we'd very much like to do that. And we'll be back with your classroom in a second.
Julius Caesar is a play about political decision-making. It's about the role of personalities in political choices. It's about conspiracy. It's about the formation of a conspiracy, about the success or failure of a conspiracy. It's about regime change. I mean, all of these political events, which are brought forth in the play and dramatized in the play, are events that we're dealing with every day. And when you are writing about a play like Julius Caesar, the fact that you are in a city that is so political, and it certainly has influenced me in thinking about a play like Julius Caesar, for example, where so much of the tension of the play is about personal conflict. It becomes a way of thinking about a play like Julius Caesar.
Yes.
Okay, so what I was saying is that because they're continuing the page, so that they're not going to do that particular device.
The Folger's collection, it's a real resource for the study of Shakespeare and Shakespeare's background, because we have the largest collection of books printed in England in Shakespeare's time in the United States. The main book that stands out for Julius Caesar is, of course, Plutarch's Lives. This was one of the most important books in Shakespeare's time from the Roman period. And the Folger has early copies of that are very interesting.
If you're here, you can hold a copy of Plutarch's Lives of the Ancient Grecians and Romans and think that this is a copy that Shakespeare, not that Shakespeare would have held that copy, but he would have held a book very much like this one. He would have referred to it. He would have read it as he was writing the plays. And there is something immediate and wonderful about having that kind of connection while you're working on a play like Julius Caesar.
We have a number of editions of classical literature that were published in the Renaissance. Some of them were school books, and you can see the kinds of texts that Shakespeare might have used in school for the classical dramatists like Plautus and Terence.
The Elizabethans had abundant sources for accessing Rome, and Roman literature, Roman politics, Roman history. Shakespeare is tapping into a very deep and broad interest in Roman history and Roman politics when he writes Julius Caesar. He knows that this is a subject that his audience is interested in. He knows it's a subject that his audience understands. And in 1599, when the play is performed at the Globe Theatre, this is the end of an era, and all of the Elizabethans in the audience knew that an era was coming to an end. It's the beginning of the English imperial designs, and so everything about Roman history would have focused their attention, appealed to them, and struck them as being lessons for what to do and what not to do. So the play offers us an absolutely brilliant and wonderful window into how choices get made and how mistakes get made and how you can move a crowd with rhetoric. It seems to me it's the most, in many ways, it's the most contemporary of plays because of the issues that it deals with, even if the names are Roman names, even if the names are in some ways unfamiliar to us. The events and the personalities, these are all intensely contemporary.
Okay, we're back, and we are now going to focus on your classroom and other classrooms that we know of. I'm going to introduce you to our two teachers. To my right is Skip Nicholson, who was a participant in the Teaching Shakespeare Institute and then a master teacher because we couldn't bear to get rid of him. Taught at Pasadena, South Pasadena High School for 41 years, recently retired, does AP workshops, does all kinds of stuff with teachers still. To his right is Mike Klein, who left his classroom this morning at Sachem North High School in, I'm going to say this right, Lake Ronkonkoma, New York. Teaches seniors, and also alum of the Teaching Shakespeare Institute here, and both these guys are in our part of our National Teacher Corps. And we're going to start with the question that this is part of my confessional earlier in this masterclass. I'm going to start to ask Skip, because I know at our request he did a little research on this, which is how did Julius Caesar end up in our curriculum, generally the American high school curriculum in the first place? Can you give us a 3-minute course on that?
I have to make the same confession, which is why I did, because I wondered for years why we had to teach that play, and found 6 reasons. There are probably more. 2 of them have to do with the idea that the English teacher was also frequently the Latin teacher. So if you're teaching Caesar's commentaries in your Latin class, then you take the same kids, probably, if you're in a small school, and do Shakespeare's play about Julius Caesar along with it.
So this is like the early 1900s or so, 1920
Yeah,
something.
between 1900 and 1920. That's
Okay.
pretty much when our curriculum got frozen when national textbooks started being printed, and it was the textbooks that dictated what people had
Right,
to teach.
right.
Even much more so than now. The Latin teacher would also been fascinated, or I don't know, fascinated, but had to teach Cicero's rhetoric. And because Julius Caesar is a highly rhetorical play, it made another good transition there, because they could teach the rhetorical techniques from Cicero and use them again in Shakespeare.
Okay, but that was in the 20s. So, but then it got
That was
frozen
in
in
the
the
20s.
textbooks.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so then once it was in the textbooks, and it probably stayed there also because it's very short. It's half the length of Hamlet. It's of the 38 plays, it's number 30. So it's an easier
In length.
in the number of lines.
number
right?
of lines. Okay.
And then in the number of different words, it's very low there too. It's number 36 out of 38. So kids aren't challenged.
Fewest number of different words.
Right. So
Okay.
so the kids aren't challenged with the huge vocabulary load that they are in some of the other plays.
That's four. Is that 4? That's 5. How many is that? How many reasons?
That's 5.
Yeah.
6 is that there's nothing dirty going on. There's no sex, which made it a much more comfortable play than plays where teachers would be put in, I suppose, what in the teens would be an awkward position of dancing around the sexual references in some of the other plays. Because
Right.
Caesar just doesn't have them.
There's no sex. There's just women wounding themselves.
Well, there's
we're going to
that.
get to that, but that's just not so difficult to talk about. Maybe in the early 20th century. Okay, so that's why we have it. I'm going to ask both you guys a question that we have gotten from a number of you, and that is about Acts 4 and 5. So I'm going to read 2 of these questions. No, I'm going to read 3 of these questions. My kids hate Act 4 and 5. How do you teach it engagingly? That's one of the questions. The second question is, someone at the Folger said it's okay to skim over Act 4 and 5 when I teach Caesar. Is this really acceptable? And there's another 4 and 5. There's another question that is very similar about Acts 4 and 5. Are there good ways to teach Acts 4 and 5, and will I burn in hell if I don't do them justice? So we have 3 questions about that. So, Mike, what do you have to say about that?
Act 5, I like to focus on the miscommunication
I'm talking about teaching it. I'm not
Right.
talking about what you like.
Well,
What
no,
happens in your classroom?
Because I ask my kids, I say, how often do you text your friend and they get a text from you and they don't understand what you meant, and then you're fighting with your friend all of a sudden over a simple text. And most of my kids appreciate that. They understand not understanding what somebody else means. Act 5 focuses a lot on misinterpretation of and miscommunication between people.
Yeah, but I'm asking about teaching it. So you teach 4 and 5.
Yeah, I do.
So you teach the whole play.
I do.
Okay.
I skip. I mean, it's totally okay to skip a lot of
What do you skip?
the conversation between Brutus and Cassius in the beginning of it. And I focus on the battle. The battle's exciting. It's boys and girls, they don't mind a battle. It gets the play moving along.
Shakespeare knew that too.
Yeah,
Not bad.
absolutely. But then there's the specific moments of the battle where things start to go wrong, but it's all because of miscommunication.
Right. Okay. Got that. So what about you in 4 and 5? Where do you stand?
Can I speak for the Folger Shakespeare Library?
You can go right ahead.
Yeah, you're perfectly welcome to skip over as much of 4 and 5 as you want.
Yeah.
I think a lot of us have been in theaters where people paid $100 to see the play and they leave at intermission because they know what's coming, which isn't a whole lot. In the packet, there's even an exercise to have kids cut Acts 4 and 5, which is a really good exercise in close reading.
Yeah.
And because it gets them to focus on what should be there. The only thing I would say is a mistake with 4 and 5 is skipping it, putting on the video, and not telling the kids what we're doing. I feel that I have to tell them, okay, I'm going to slight these 2 acts because of this, this, and this. Some of them then become great Shakespeare fans and want to point out to me why I'm wrong, which is wonderful because that gets the conversation going.
Yep. Okay, so that's interesting. So and it points out, I mean, clearly Mike finds value in those acts, and I think a lot of it has to do with you. I mean, if you love those acts and you want to teach them, I mean, I was doing some long distance learning course with the University of Northern Iowa earlier this week, and there was a teacher there who gave me a lot of grief for my opinion about Caesar, as he should, and he said, I love this play, and he talked with great enthusiasm about what goes on in Acts 4 and 5, and I said, then you should teach this play, right? Yeah. But we also say about any play, cut it. Directors cut plays all the time, so that's use your own judgment.
What I wanted to add, Skip mentioned, I didn't want it to just escape. It's a very good close reading exercise to have. I do this all the time with every play I teach. Put them in groups, let them work out through the text what is essential to the plot, and then what is not, and then discuss why. And then,
so how many kids in a group?
4 or 5, depends on the size of a class. If I have 30 kids in the class, I'm either going to have big groups or a lot of little small groups.
Yeah, and do you give them a whole act? Or?
I'll give them, if I have that many kids, absolutely. I'll put them in charge of different groups, different sets of lines, different scenes, depending on how many kids I have. Absolutely. And then I'll walk around the room and I'll listen to them discuss what lines need to be there, what lines not to be there. And
so they can make whatever cuts they want.
And they're so tentative at first because it's Shakespeare, it's on a pedestal, and teachers should not allow their students to let Shakespeare be on a pedestal. It belongs to everybody. And let the kids cut it, and then after half a period, they're throwing lines out all over the place. Then I come back, why are you cutting that line? So I follow up. Why are you cutting that line? Why are you keeping that line? And then that gets into the group, and then they start asking themselves those questions. Why are we cutting this line? And there's no closer reading than
I was going to
editing.
say, and what that is close reading, and when that's happening, we're really happy. Yep.
I do pretty much the same thing, but I'll hover over them, and like in Act 4, I'll say, are you willing to lose this part about friendship? Oh no, which is an important theme of the play. So there are, like you say, there are themes that carry through that we might want kids to focus on.
Right.
I think if we pay attention to those. I know cutting is great.
Yeah, and this is a play that, we're going to talk a little bit later about some of the imagery in the play, but this is a play I think more kids can understand because of the friendship elements, the jealousy elements. This is something kids in high school are experiencing on a regular basis, and they relate to those things. How do you feel when you're jealous? Manipulation, how people get manipulated.
All going on in high school. Let's talk about some of the big speeches. Several people have asked questions about the big orations, the funeral orations, and the soliloquies and monologues and stuff. How do you, Mike? Let me ask you. So, how do you teach? How do you teach those? How do you start with those?
Again, it's putting kids into groups and letting them work with the text. My overview first, with a monologue, a long monologue, or a long soliloquy, is to make sure we're not just looking at a pile of words on a page. I said, let's break it down into order of ideas. All Shakespeare's monologues and soliloquies have an order of ideas. First, he's addressing the body of Caesar. Then he's addressing his emotions. Then he's addressing the people.
So your kids figure out the order of ideas?
I give them tools, and it's visual or verbal tools. I tell them to look for turn words like but or and or so, and that will begin often a separate idea.
So they're in a group, and they. Oh wait, great. Show this. Wait. Do they have a piece of text like this?
This is.
Here, let me show it.
Yep.
Go ahead. Say what it is.
Well, that's an actual student copy of 3 different speeches in the play where the groups will be breaking down and asking questions of the text. So what is he addressing first? So in the Brutus speech in the orchard, Act 2, Scene 1.
Yeah.
I have them. What's he first talking about? So he's talking about must be by his death. So who's the his? What's he talking about here first? And then by the end we get into the serpent and the egg. You know, what's on Brutus's mind? What are the different things he's thinking about? It's not just one big lump of words on the page.
Right, but that's so they're in groups and they're working with a piece of text and they're marking up the text like
they're
crazy.
writing all over the
Talking
text.
about what
yeah.
it means.
And using the Folger digital text, it's easy to make copies of the textbook that you're using in class.
Actually, that's great, and that's on your resource list, folgerdigitaltext.org.
So easy.
You can print out anything. So, okay, so that's some techniques in terms of getting into some of those longer speeches. What else do we have? I know. What about students? Several people have asked about students' knowledge of ancient Rome. And here's just one question. My students know little about ancient Rome and about the historical figure of Caesar. How much front-loading do you do in terms of teaching them about ancient Rome? Or should I partner with a classics teacher or a history teacher in order to do that? Skip, what do you think?
I don't.
You don't what?
I don't depend on other departments or front load a lot of Roman history. One, because when I do it, I bore the kids, and what's important about the history comes out in the play. Shakespeare's really good about, although his audience knew Rome a lot better than we do today. It was a very popular topic then, but the kids understand. One thing that we use is to show kids that Julius Caesar, really a good deal of Julius Caesar's career leads up to the attempt at a dissolution of the Roman Republic and the establishment of the Roman Empire. Mm-hmm. And if we take out the words Roman there and we tell the kids it's about the attempt to crush the Republic by the Empire, they hear the Star Wars music before we even mention it.
Right.
And because that's the story that Lucas takes. So they're familiar with that. So they know this story already. And the politics of Rome can help them with a deeper understanding of the play. But the first time through it, that's not really what I always tell my kids, that this is an introduction to Caesar. This is an introduction to Hamlet, to whatever play we're doing, and that they're going to want to come back to it later.
Go ahead. So you mean your teaching of it is an introduction? It's like a first pass?
Right. And I tell them, there's a whole lot in here that in the 5-6 weeks we have, we can't possibly get to.
Right.
But I want them to understand that it comes, what I say, that Shakespeare's plays don't kiss on the first date.
Right.
You have to keep coming back to them.
Well, and it's why people have come back to them for 400 plus years, and why the Folger Library is in business. I think people are in that reading room.
And each group
in
of
that
kids
theater.
that acts out a scene is going to do it in a different way. And
Sure.
that's because every director is going to do it differently.
Right.
Well, that's something we do in class too, is I'll have them act out scenes. And so the close reading that we were talking about earlier, and then having them actually put the scenes on their feet right there in class, really sets the plays further within than just leaving it on the page. It's really important to get into the text.
Got it. I'm going to take one question that we just got, which is, but I also want another. People are asking about the video that we just showed you with Gail Pastor. This whole masterclass will be archived, and you'll get a copy of the whole thing in a week or two, and that video will be included. We love that video. We're glad you like it. Here's a question, which is, should you front load definitions of frequently used Shakespeare words? Should you do the vocabulary list before you do the play? I have an answer to that, but we have minutes to answer that quickly. Both of you.
In the packet, there's a list of words that's used frequently in Shakespeare. I'll sometimes give a group of kids 4 or 5 words to work with, and then follow how those words are used in the play.
But that's not that's not vocabulary word definitions.
It's definition and context.
Yeah, which is yeah, sir.
I don't. We deal with them as they come up, and the words that they're going to really need are going to come up often enough. They learn a non by the end of Act 1 of almost any play. Words like that, they're going to learn from there. So I really don't. I don't give them a list of words to go out and memorize, because that's what half of them will go out and memorize it and not for no particular reason, and the other half will ignore it.
Right.
And I'm not sure it helps them understand the play much.
Yeah, I gave that up a while ago because they don't stick. But when you get kids working like you were talking about, they have to figure out what those words mean, or then in context they have to look them up, and then they remember them. Okay, we have just a little bit of time here. So here's a question that maybe I can answer, which is there a missing scene in any of the folios that show Portia being told of the conspiracy? And the answer is no. There's no missing scene. So actually, you can go to our website, go to folger.edu, and you can go right to a digital copy of the first folio. You can flip through the whole thing, and you can read Julius Caesar in the original first folio, in a digitized version of the first folio, and so you can see for yourself that there's no secret scene hidden away. As Skip mentioned earlier, there's only one text of Julius Caesar. 18 of his plays were printed in quarto, in sort of little paperback books, and then also printed in the first folio. But the rest of his plays, including Julius Caesar, was only printed in the first folio. And so if we didn't have the first folio, we wouldn't have Caesar, which is getting to be better news, I think, as this masterclass goes on. We are gonna wrap up this segment, and we're gonna send you off to Antony's funeral speech. And during that time, I'm going to slide out of this seat, and Christy and Gail are going to come back, and Skip is going to take over moderating because only 4 of us can fit at this table. And then we're going to have high school teachers and scholars talking together. Keep sending in your questions if you would like to, though we still have a bunch to talk to. To talk from and to answer that you sent us earlier. So we will be back in a couple of minutes, and Skip's going to moderate.
Friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears. I come to bury Caesar, not to praise him. The evil that men do lives after them. The good is oft interred with their bones. So let it be with Caesar. The noble Brutus hath told you Caesar was ambitious. If it were so, it was a grievous fault, and grievously hath Caesar answered it. Here, under leave of Brutus and the rest, for Brutus is an honorable man, so are they all honorable men. Come I to speak in Caesar's funeral. He was my friend, faithful and just to me, but Brutus says he was ambitious, and Brutus is an honorable man. He hath brought many captives home to Rome, whose ransoms did the general coffers fill. Did this in Caesar seem ambitious? When that the poor have cried, Caesar hath wept. Ambition should be made of sterner stuff, yet Brutus says he was ambitious, and Brutus is an honorable man. You all did see that on the Lupercal I thrice presented him a kingly crown, which he did thrice refuse. Was this ambition? Yet Brutus says he was ambitious, and sure he is an honorable man. I speak not to disprove what Brutus spoke, But here I am to speak what I do know. You all did love him once, not without cause. What cause withholds you then to mourn for him? O judgment, thou art fled to brutish beasts, and men have lost their reason. Bear with me. My heart is in the coffin there with Caesar, and I must pause till it come back to me.
Welcome back. We're here again with your questions and with some of our own. We do have a question about why do you think Lucius is always asleep or in need of sleep when he appears in the play? We'll see what the scholars say. I have my students go through, I actually have them track Lucius as a character and see when Shakespeare brings him on, why, what Brutus needs at that point. And for me, he's the innocent one. He gets to sleep when Brutus can't sleep. When Brutus doesn't have any light, with all the things that light can represent, it's Lucius who brings it in. So to me, he's a fascinating character. So the sleep, to me, is he gets to sleep because he's innocent, and Brutus doesn't get to sleep because he's not. I don't know, how does he strike?
I think that's a beautiful reading. I often think about the sleepiness around Brutus. It's not just Lucius, it seems to me, but there are a couple times when Brutus is awake and others are asleep. And that always reminds me of Christ in Gethsemane. One of the ways I read this play is in terms of its only barely pre-Christian context. And there are a number of ways in which the play uses Christian typology. In other words, it uses the sort of structures of well-known Christian episodes to frame the complexities of the Roman politics. And to me, Lucius Asleep reminds me, right, of the burden of Christ and facing, his huge role to play in the salvation of mankind, while around him the disciples innocent of his burden, right, sleep.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just thinking that I focus mostly on Lucius' youth, or his innocence, and he fills that role that is often filled in histories by there's always a boy that is slaughtered in Henry V. Even in Titus Andronicus, where everybody gets killed, there's a baby alive at the end, and that you don't get a young and vital person until so late in the play in Julius Caesar. And if you remember that little detail that Shakespeare took from Plutarch, telling Mark Antony to strike Calpurnia when he runs the race by, so that she'll conceive,
engender an heir.
And so we've really got a kind of dying culture, aging culture here.
With 15-year-olds. With the play, I have them try to look for things that that we've been teaching them since freshman year. So I teach it as far as like contrasts. So something I say when I ask you a question in an essay, you should have some default settings, characterization, setting. Contrast is something you can look at, and Lucius and Brutus is a terrific contrast that could be looked at a lot closer as far as characters and the needs of one and stuff like that. That's really good. I like that.
But we have a question too. My kids always wonder why people fear Caesar. What's the threat? How do I answer this without tons of background information? I think a lot of that's in the play, isn't it?
I think the fear of tyranny and the sense, for instance, that history is on track for something momentous, that we're on the precipice of some great turn in history, often gets people alive to future consequences that can only be imagined. And so it seems to me that it's not just that there's sort of practical information about Caesar and how he's sort of reaching beyond what his grip should be, but there's just a sense that that this is itself a turning point, that people need to think beyond what's evidenced, the supernatural environment of the play sort of tips us in that direction. And I guess what I love about the play is that it doesn't have a good answer to this question, right? I mean, I think the reason that it's such a brilliant meditation on the complexity of governance is precisely that we don't know what would have happened had Caesar continued.
Part of my homework on the way up on the airplane was I read through the snippets of Plutarch that are in my little book, and there it became so clear that they had had so much civil war, Pompey being the last victim in these civil wars, and that they kind of gave Caesar more authority than would be expected or wanted in order to settle things down and to give some stability. And then they see him liking that and going the next step. So Brutus is the one person in the play who remembers, maybe because his own ancestor was involved and crucial in getting rid of tyrants the first time and establishing the Republic. Nobody else seems to remember that, but he seems to. I guess I'm kind of hypothetical look there, but
I think it's it's a human characteristic. Shakespeare's plays are also humanistic. The fear of the unknown. Brutus spends the whole time in the orchard wondering. Cassius is afraid, and it's relative to contemporary times too. You know, it's as we mentioned earlier, it's an election year, and we always think about what's going to happen. It's very similar. We've been worried about the unknown for a long time, and that's something else I share with my kids. Is what connects one piece of literature to another, and how can we look at it thematically? As we mentioned the lack of imagery in this play. Let's talk about some of the themes, the unifying themes.
And Caesar, is it my reading? Shakespeare makes Caesar a little bit frightening. I mean, the first three things he says in the play are all commands to people. He doesn't ask questions; he gives commands. Compares himself to the Northern Star, the only one unshakable, and that I am he. And then he switches, which for Shakespeare's audience would have meant a lot more than I think it does to us and to our kids. Then he switches into the royal plural. What touches us ourselves shall be last served. He's got a crown on already in his own imagination, and when he hasn't even played the silly game with Mark Antony about giving him the crown and turning it down. So he's really kind of spooky. And of course, then there's the irony that when all this is over and the play finishes, I think they're going to end up with a dictator anyway.
yes.
Well,
Right.
In the classroom, I have kids work on Julius Caesar's speech that he's the Northern Star. So I have one group read it as a dictator, and then I have another group read it as he's there for the people, that he's somebody they can count on. He's constant, he's always going to be consistent. So, and then I have them compare that presentation of those interpretations. Yeah. There's so many different ways to go with the language. It's a line on a page, and I ask my kids, how can we read this line 3 different ways? I'm constant as a Northern Star, dictator. I'm constant. I'm always going to be this way.
That's one of my favorite lines to the kids. They'll say, "Well, what does this mean?" And I say, "Well, we've talked. We don't say that in here anymore." And say, "Well, you're the director. What do you want it to mean?" And they say, "You've got." So, which Caesar are you going to do? Well, which is right? You say, well, try them both. With this director on Thursday night it's going to be this, and then on Saturday night it's going to be. That's what makes Shakespeare so much more fun, I think, than the novels you're talking about, because they give us answers.
Right.
And here we're left with questions, and kids get to direct the play.
And with those kinds of exercises, that gets a lot of kids involved who maybe not speak up a lot in class, don't want to get up in front of everybody. You can give them the directorial side of things. What do you think? Do you think he's being nice, or do you think he's being a dictator? And then that kid has contributed now to the scene, and it starts to involve a lot of kids. And to see it then performed really is it's something for those kids too.
That's great. Can we, as we close out here, can we go around and just ask each of you for a final thought in our last minute here?
Sure. Well, I'd say, I think that question is an example of a really perceptive question, in that the play itself gives you, it seems like, a battle between good and evil. You were talking about Star Wars, which sort of sets up that idea, right, a fight for the future of society, of civilization. And then it offers you absolutely no clear answers. And what instigates Brutus to this act is partly Cassius, right? Is partly seduction to a bad act, but it's partly a kind of great ethical purity. And Shakespeare gives us two versions of the right answer to that question, and it's up to us to decide which one we feel is more solid for the moment.
My kind of final thought was I sort of made a pitch for Anthony having a moment of being the hero of the play. And then Ellen's done that really good kind of exploration of Portia. And I guess the thought I had is that I would really like some more attention to Calpurnia, because they actually do inhabit a world where lions walk the streets and dreams come true, and people who, she's the only one who pays any attention to dreams. So the world that they live in is partly a Calpurnia world, not the Roman virtue and honor world, and she should be paid more attention to.
I'm beginning to like this play.
Yes.
I always have. One of my essay questions, and we talk about it in class a little bit, is why isn't this play called The Lamentable Tragedy of Marcus Brutus? And it stuns the kids to think about it that way, that we spend so much time with Brutus and we spend the whole play with him, how he's changed. He's manipulated by Cassius, and then all the way by the end he can't take it anymore. And then he's called the noblest Roman.
That's a perfect closing, because we're going to leave you now with some still pictures from the 2014 Folger Shakespeare Library production, the Folger Shakespeare Theater production of Julius Caesar. And since Shakespeare's audience said they went to hear a play, not to see a play, we're going to let you hear Brutus' scene with Portia in the orchard from that production. And thank you.
And upon my knees I charm you, by my once commended beauty, by all your vows of love, and that great vow which did incorporate and make us one, that you unfold to me, yourself, your half. Why, you are heavy. And what men tonight have had resort to you? For here have been some 6 or 7 who did hide their faces even from darkness.
Kneel not, gentle Portia.
I should not need if you were gentle, Brutus. Within the bond of marriage, tell me, Brutus, is it accepted I should know no secrets that appertain to you? Am I yourself, but as it were, in sort or limitation, to keep with you at meals, comfort your bed, and talk to you sometimes? Dwell I but in the suburbs of your good pleasure? If it be no more, Portia's Brutus harlot, not his wife.
You are my true and honourable wife, as dear to me as are the ruddy drops that visit my sad heart.
If this were true, then should I know this secret. I grant I am a woman, but withal, a woman that Lord Brutus took to wife. I grant I am a woman, but withal, a woman well reputed, Cato's daughter. Think you I am no stronger than my sex, being so fathered and so husbanded? Tell me your counsels, I will not disclose them. I have made strong proof of my constancy, giving myself a voluntary wound, here, in the thigh. Can I bear that with patience and not my husband's secrets?
Oh, you gods! Render me worthy of this noble wife. Hark, one knocks. Portia, go in a while, and by thy bosom shall partake the secrets of my heart.
Love that bonus. Love that Portia and Brutus speech. It's my job to wrap this up for this masterclass and also for all the masterclasses this year. This is the last of our 3. Thanks to Christy and Ellen, to Mike and Skip, to Danielle Drakes and Corinne Villetta on the Folger Education team, and the rest of the Folger Education team, of course. Thanks to our partners at Alabama Public Television, those in D.C. with us and also those in Alabama. And mainly thanks to you. Thanks to you for participating in these and for sending us great questions and making us think and letting us help you think. That's the most important part of our job, and we totally appreciate that. So we're off these master classes for the rest of the year, but we are not off them. If you have ideas about plays you think you want to see master classes focus on, let us know. Or the best times of the year to schedule them, or any kind of feedback you want to give us about them, send a note to me, to pobrien@folger.edu, because we really want to hear from you. We never plan anything without getting input from teachers and feedback from teachers, so we would love to have it from you. In the meantime, though, you can't escape us, even though this is the last master class. So we're going to send you an invitation for you and your students. We want to invite you to celebrate Shakespeare's birthday with us this year, the famous 2016 day, and Death Day, with us in a special way. So we're going to let you know about that. We also want you need to go see the first folio when it comes to your state, if it hasn't already and you haven't already done that. Very cool. And lastly, we're gonna send you an invitation. We want to see tons of your students in short videos, telling us their Shakespeare story, telling us their favorite scene, telling us why they like Shakespeare, why they don't, whatever. This is a campaign that we're doing all year, all through 2016, #MyShakes400. We're going to send you a note about that too. So the master classes may be over for the year, but you can't be rid of us. We think about you all the time here, and we think about how we can serve teachers all the time, better and better. Have a great spring break. Have a great rest of the semester. Take care. Good night.